Emily, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, our podcast is about your journey in the music industry, really, and how you got to where you are now.
Well, I hope you're ready to listen.
I am. I'm a very good listener.
Oh, good, because I'm a great talker. So
perfect.
So you just guide the journey, and I'll fill in the gaps. How's that?
Let's do it. Yeah, sounds good. Where are you from originally?
I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I would live there mainly until pretty much college. And so then I went up to upstate New York, went to Syracuse, with two other I always do this now that I have the names to drop from there, but Pete Yorn and Brad Bird also went to Syracuse. So besides all the Bob Costases and whatnot that they're known for, there's some pretty far along songwriters that have come out of there too. Sure. I don't know, maybe it's all the cold. You know, you're stuck in your room writing songs.
Yeah.
Trying not to get
freezer.
Yeah, what's the word? Frostbite. Like on your nose and in your extremities.
Right.
So.
That's funny. How did you get into music?
Well, I always say I came out singing. I've sung my entire life. Very early on, I was, in choirs, or, my family was Catholic, so there was church. And as I grew older,
I know all about that.
Yeah,
so much standing and singing.
Standing, singing, kneeling, standing, singing. That's where it's the calisthenics of Christ. So there, and then I discovered I was given an acoustic guitar by my grandmother when I think I was 8 or 10, and I kind of picked it up for a little bit, and then I put it away, and then rediscovered it like a year or so later. And that's when things clicked. I started taking lessons, I was writing songs, I was listening to the Beatles nonstop, and shortly thereafter, I became part of like a folk mass. So I like, for a while, I knew all of Glory and Praise 1 and 2. If you're Catholic, you know these books.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was singing and playing every week because there wasn't much of a scene, especially for kids, that involved playing live. There was sort of a hardcore scene when I was in high school, and I wasn't part of it, but I had friends who were, so I went to see shows then. And I was one of those theater nerds and art room nerds. So I sang in like jazz band and stage band, and we'd go and we'd find the karaoke places. And my, friends that did that, we'd go and we'd sing, show tunes or rock songs or power ballads of the 80s, and that was how you performed. And most of us who did that sort of work all sort of left because there wasn't much of a scene there, and went to different parts of the country. And it's funny because I'm in touch with a lot of the folks that I used to do theater and stage band with now, and most of them are working in the biz on a professional level, some of whom have done very well for themselves. So it's kind of funny. I was telling my husband when we were watching what was that Netflix show about Hollywoodland, and it had all the young stars, but it had like Patti LuPone.
Right, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember.
I'm blanking on it, and this is terrible. This is what I do. But one of the women now, who I did Annie Get Your Gun with when I was a sophomore, played, she wasn't one of the main leads, but she floated in and out in a lot of them. She played one of the executives at Ace Studios, and I was like, I did Annie Get Your Gun with her. And my husband's like, what? And I was like, yeah, we went to high school together. We did theater together. So it's kind of funny to have that now and know that you were part of a little community even back then.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Did you go to college for musical theater?
I did not. I went for television, radio, film production, and I, went down that path, a lot of different media internships, and I worked in indie film briefly when I first moved to New York, and I was on the production side, and I was like, oh man, indie production, you're working like 80 hours a week for like $250. Like I've got to find something else.
I know about that.
This isn't scratching that itch, not that much. Plus, I also discovered that whenever I did that, And then I kind of got into doing extra work. And I was sort of like, I prefer doing the in front of camera work. And I had this exact same experience. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me. But after I lived in New York briefly, I moved to San Francisco and I worked as a journalist. So I was doing a lot of writing and interviewing musicians, filmmakers, for smaller pubs or blogs that were online at the time. And I had an interesting time, but I was sort of like, I kind of want to be the person who's doing this, who's making the thing that people want to read about instead of just working for the byline. And so then I started concentrating on music, and I was in a few cover bands. I had my own project, and the band that I was part of that was an original kind of, it was an accumulation of my songs and my songwriting partner's songs, Ben Ratliff. It was called Sex Fresh. And we did some shows. We went down to South by Southwest and played some showcases.
Wow.
And then we, .com, which was all of our day jobs, blew up. And so we had really high rents and no money. So then everybody kind of dispersed.
So that was when you were in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay.
So first .com wave. And then Ben and I, we drove through the Southwest and did an acoustic tour together.
Oh, cool.
We hung out in Texas at his parents' ranch outside of Austin for a while. We were playing Austin. And then we made our way up to New York at I think the end of 2001.
Oh my, what a time to go to New York.
Well, it was a weird time in that, like, there were people I knew who were like, right after 9/11, were like, it's time to move to New York, because people were fleeing. And I think some of us were hoping for like the gritty 70s and like finding ridiculous, going there, making art, having it be less about capitalist gains and just sort of like finding people and digging deep. Because it seemed people were really humbled, obviously. And there was a lot of rebuild. And so I knew I said, leading up to 9/11, everywhere you went in San Francisco, people were talking about moving to New York. There was just this feeling like everybody was going to New York, because it was having this heyday of like .com, and it had already imploded in San Francisco, and it just felt like there was energy there. It's like, I got to go where the energy is. And then 9/11 happened, and then like crickets, we were like, I'm not going there. And a lot of people were like, I'm getting out. Yeah. And I was like, I was ready to go. And we had this buffer, because we left in October from San Francisco and didn't get to New York till like New Year's Eve. So there was like a 3-month window where things were really intense, but we weren't there yet. That's when we were doing the Southwest tour, Ben and I. But I had other friends in the Bay Area who were like, it's time to go. This is the time to go to New York. And so there were people I knew who were definitely going. And, I had already made the plans. So I'm like, I'm going. We'll see what happens. I knew I had friends there, and, work always seems to work out for me. Like, I've always been a freelancer. So I've never been like, I have to get a job with benefits. That was like never my thing. I was always like, all right, I'll figure something out. And that's how I got to New York the first time. I just ended up crashing on a couch, and then a room opened up in the house, and then I had an interview, and then I fell into a job, and then I lost the job, and then I got involved in film, and my resume is a mess. It's very interesting, but it has no, trajectory other than the general clause of media and performance.
But I love that. It's not just, I went to college and then I got this job as
I hated specialization. I've always hated it.
20 years. That's not my thing either.
Syracuse is a big, because it's a big media school. So they're all about specialization there, or at least at the time I was there, they were. And I just didn't get that. I mean, I took classes all over the Newhouse school, because I was like, doesn't feel like a good fit. And what I learned about myself is there's not just one good fit. It has helped me as the world, especially of music, has changed, where you're expected to know more and be able to produce more of your own like content. I hate that word, but that's the way it's described now. And having a hand in a lot of areas, and also being willing to go like, okay, let's jump in, let's watch some YouTube videos and like figure this out. I like to tinker. I like, I was the one that even, growing up as a teenager in my house, my parents were like, can you program the VCR to tape this at this time? And like, that was my job. Or can you help me figure out this remote? Okay. you know, so I was kind of trained to be that person, and then it
Yeah.
turned out that I was good at it. So it's helped me like getting Final Cut Pro and returning to like
Editing and
figuring
stuff.
out editing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, these have all been, it seems like the story's all over the map, but it all makes sense to where I am now. After, you know, I was in New York for 10 years and then I moved to LA, and I've been here almost 10 years now, which is
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
But on each step of the way, there have been all these like blurbs, which we can get into more detail as. I'll let you go because I could talk for a while, but
No, I love
I want direction, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, no, this is perfect. Okay, so you're talking about touring from San Francisco. Was that the very first tour you had done, or that was just a tour that you had done?
Yeah, that was actually the first time I had been on the road.
Okay.
We'd done little things around the Bay Area with that band, or going to South by and then setting up a bunch of shows in Texas for the week. But that was the first time where you plotted it out. And then the year after that, I was living in New York, but I was with a group of people. We were doing Burning Man camps. So we were always going out to Burning Man. And so I decided after that year at Burning Man, I was going to go across the country in my car with another musician, Pi Jacobs, and we had plotted this whole thing. It was going to be the Babes with Beats tour 2002 or 2000? No, it must have been 2002. So I went to Burning Man, did that for a week, kind of like had a couple days to decompress, and then started a month on the road with someone who I kind of knew, but not really. So you get to know your co-musician. And we had figured this thing out where we both had our own songs, but we figured out a way that we would accompany one another musically and harmonically. And we were playing songs with beats. So we had built this box, which had, like, at the time, a CD player in it, which would play the beats and the rhythm sections, and had, like, flashing lights and a smoke machine. It was like kind of DJ in a box.
That's rad.
We were playing together, and we did something like 38 dates in 40 days. Now that includes like radio and everything too. Like sometimes we'd do like 1 or 2 things per day. Sometimes we'd have a couple days off.
But you're doing like
maybe it was 28
showcases and stuff.
Yeah, we did some on TV. We did like the morning show in Austin, and
wow.
I have some of this stuff lying around somewhere. But we did that. It was 28 days and 28 dates, you know, appearances in 30 days. That's what it was. So we took a month to drive across the country, did most of the stuff through the Southwest and Texas, and then a couple sprinklings getting up to New York because we were both living in New York at the time. And
how did you get the like radio shows and stuff? Were they playing your song?
We just reached out to specialized, you know, it's usually like we were contacting like women radio shows.
Oh,
like,
cool.
You know, so you'd get like dialed in. We're like, we're coming through, we're playing this date, we'd love to come in and talk about the show, and here's our records. And I was working with Pi, who'd done tours before, and she'd set them up on her own. So I learned quickly. We were simpatico in the way that we could kind of divide and conquer, and we both had our own contacts. I had more in like roots Americana thing because that's what Sex Fresh was doing, and so we just kind of cobbled it together. And then we did a shorter run 2 years later that was mainly just California. I don't know if we went down to the Southwest or not. I can't remember. I mean, it was a long time ago. But then there was a group that I helped to form with another female artist out of New York, Athena Reich. She's Canadian. She's back in Canada now. But the two of us kind of gathered, I don't know, there were about 6 female-led or bands or female singer-songwriters, and we formed a loose collective called Sirens Wild Ride. We did like 3 different regional tours, and I was part of all 3 of those runs. And we did, you know, press, and when we'd set up the shows, we'd contact feminist groups, LGBT groups, try to make them like events where they could have like co-sponsor and have their information out and tell their lists, and we would tell our people. And we got involved in like a women's music conference in Columbus, Ohio, and University of Ohio. That was fun. Yeah, just like weird stuff. We were just like, hey, let's try it and let's see if it works. And a lot of times, you know, we got some press out of these things, mostly within like women's radio and women's, you know, there were some magazines out of New York that were sort of like, you know, smaller indie tours or feminine stuff or, you know, LGBT stuff. And I know there's like 5 other initials now that it shows, it dates me. Like when I was dealing with it, I'm like, I'm forgetting Q, I forgot T, I got like cis in there, you know, like I don't even know all the initials now. And I'm sorry if I come across as ignorant. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to show that where I was in the time that I was working, you know, in this
Right.
groups, like it's changed. The language has changed.
Totally it's changed.
And then I think, I'm trying to remember the timeline. If after that, I kind of settled into New York and was playing mainly New York and maybe some stuff upstate.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started concentrating on Europe. And a friend of mine, Will Hawkins, said, hey, I'm going over to England and you should check it out. I'm starting to make some traction over there and I'm going to pair up with some other musicians. We could do a couple co-shows and maybe you could do like a couple showcases on your own. I said, okay, cool. I want to try that. I have relatives in England. So I was like, that's cool. I can probably like, you know, go visit them and go check it out and see how it goes. Cause they were definitely more into like Americana roots. And that was the direction. Like I had a rock vibe in there too, but I wasn't doing tons with the electronic music that I've done. Mm-hmm. And I'll get into that phase next. Cause it's never been like the main thing, but it's been there for a while, since about the mid 2000s. Okay. Went over to England, I think 3 or 4 times over the course of like 2 years. One time was with Ari Hest and Benji Rogers, and we did like a concentrated tour of like England, Ireland, and Scotland, and that was really exciting. I did one tour after that one. That was on my own. And at that point, I had like 3 or 4 places that I could just call up, say, hey, I'm coming back. What do you have in these date range? And so I put together something. And I haven't been back since, which is scary. No, and then I was like, I'm living in New York. I'm paying rent. Why don't I like try to build something here? So then I concentrated on New York until I left. And so...
How was that first tour? Like, had you ever been to Europe before prior to?
I had. My cousin who lives in England, she got married in 85. So all my family trekked over from the States for this, like, and we gave them this like crazy experience because she was living in Wales and she got, you know, I was like 12 or something. Okay. And you know, the wedding's in a castle, you know, for a girl who grows up with ideas of living in castles and princesses. Sure, like we're touring the castles of like Wales and went to London and saw toured the Tower of London and saw the bridge. And it was just like blow your mind territory. Because I grew up in a very not urban way. Like I was an hour from Pittsburgh, but I could have been in the middle of like a cornfield, you know, like my experience was very limited. Was not touring castles and things like that. So I had been to England, and so
touring there, was that like, I don't know.
It was exciting.
Yeah, exciting, but like not knowing where you really are and like getting around. Like, how did you have to just like public transit? Yeah, okay. Yeah,
you know, I mean, it's scary and exciting at the same time. I had a few experiences while living in the Bay Area where I went to different countries and I wasn't necessarily staying with Americans the whole time. So the idea of like going to a place where I didn't have a language that was necessarily the dominant language and just having to have my lonely planet guide and figure it out. I'd done that. I did that once in Morocco and I did that once in Brazil. And those experiences, they shake off the cobwebs for sure. So going to England seemed easy because I have the same language. I'm doing something I know how to do, and I know how to get around on trains at this point or buses. Okay. So it was scary in that, like, what am I going to find when I get there? Are they going to like what I do? Sure. But it was emboldening too because I had really good experiences, and it wasn't that difficult of terrain to get through. I had a place where I was going to stay. It was in London. I stayed in the guest bedroom of this friend of mine who I'd done a lot of co-writing with since. That was probably the foray into electronica. He was a big trip hop producer, and I've always loved trip hop because it felt to me like the marriage of electronic music and songwriting. So that was exciting to work with someone who, because I had dabbled with beats, with Babes with Beats and some like just demo projects after that. But I hadn't really worked with any producers who had a studio and knew how to make things on a professional level. So we started writing together, but I had a place to stay, and I had relatives in another part of England who I'd always go visit. At the time they lived on the Isle of Wight, and that was like a whole journey, because it takes a subway, it takes the tube to a train to another train to a ferry. So it's not an easy journey, but it's very exciting because you're going through the English countryside. You see these amazing manors in the countryside, and I'd always do it by myself. So I'd bring my journal, I'd bring maybe a guitar with me, I'd bring a book, and I'd sit and look out the window. I'd write in my journal. I'd take image. I had a digital camera, but it was one of these little point and shoots. I'd take lots of pictures and just. I also learned how to be by myself. I've always had big groups of friends that make it easy to kind of move in unfamiliar territory. But when you're traveling on your own, you're really testing your mettle. How comfortable are you? Oh, this is uncomfortable. Oh, it's pushing all my shyness, insecurity buttons. But you get through it, sometimes better than others. You learn grace, you learn forgiveness, you learn all these things. That help you throughout life. And, I think a lot of your 20s and part of your 30s are kind of putting on the armor. And it's like, I know what I'm doing. I got this,
Yeah,
and,
sure.
And then the rest of your life is learning how to take those parts off and being okay with being uncomfortable and trying new things and failing and learning how to fail, learning how to make mistakes and try again. And some people work on that. Some people it's not comfortable. I know adults who are much older who are like, I don't think I could take that Band-Aid off. I don't want to see what's there, and that may be a generational thing. It may just be a comfort thing with who you are and where you are in your journey. I've worked a lot on that, and sometimes I'm better at it than others.
Sure.
But it is something I'm dedicated to, and it just where you are like, hey, quarantine's a good time to work on that. Right. You got nothing to distract yourself except like in my case, I also have to make sure that my kid is like participating in school and doing the basics.
That's what I have to do too.
Yeah, and that's challenging, and not having the thing I miss probably more than anything, and it's a selfish miss, but I miss having the house to myself. Being by myself. And honestly, I think I've made the substitution, even though I love having my family around and even on the adventure tours, I call them like walking the dog. But sometimes the walking the dog by myself is really my alone time. And even then, I'm not totally alone because I'm walking the dog and I'm dealing with like poop and all that other stuff.
I totally get that's the same for me. I'm like, okay, I can walk the dog for 15 minutes, but
because I forgot how much, not having something I have to run an errand for, just being in the quiet of my house. Like after my daughter would go to school and my husband go to work, like having that moment to go like,
sure.
And, I don't have it much, since March.
Right.
And you steal the moments when you can. Sometimes I've been lucky where I was like, I'm going to take her. We'll go for a hike. It's like, oh my God, thank you. And like, even if I had to go deal with something with the dog, there was probably a window of at least 15 minutes where I'd get back and the house was quiet. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Okay, so you make it back to New York after you're touring Europe.
Yeah, and I decide that I'm going to be a New York musician. So I focus on, and that was weird because I think around that time is when Rockwood Music Hall opened.
Okay.
I might be off. Let me think. If this was the 10-year or the 15-year, so that would make it 2005, 2006. I was touring the UK around then. So it was already open, but I had moved to the East Village and was about 3 blocks away from that place. So from its inception, it was a curiosity because the main songwriter room at the time was the living room. And I'd played there maybe once or twice, but it was just not like my circle. It had its own circle of people. And I had played a few more times after Rockwood had opened, but Rockwood was really like my home base. And I met so many musicians there and people I'd collaborated with, I used to run a songwriter event called What's in a Name, where
Oh, cool.
there was a group of songwriters who were interested in being part of this challenge. I would get a word from someone outside the community. I'd send it out to everybody. I'd book the room a month later, and we'd get together in a month and play all of our songs inspired by the word. I had a lot of songs that came out of that ended up on my record, The Wild Joys of Living, in 2011. I had other people who came every month, who, 3 or 4 of their tunes they wrote for that ended up on albums. So that was exciting to be part of that little circle, who have spearheaded it, and to see other people get stuff out of it. That was cool. So that was one of the things I did in New York. And I'm trying to think, during that period also, I was playing with a bunch of really talented singer-songwriters who've gone on to do much more, like James Maddock, Leslie Mendelsohn, who's another one that came out of it, Aaron Brooks, drummer, who introduced me to Moby, which is how I ended up doing that co-write.
Yeah, tell me about meeting Moby and that whole thing. That's
Moby was working on putting together the band The Little Death, which was like that blues rock band that he did in the late aughts, early 2010. And there was some weird, like, it started and then it kind of, there was a question of whether the person who was originally the vocalist was going to be the vocalist. So I went in as an audition to possibly sing with The Little Death. The original singer and Moby worked out whatever it was, and it was Laura Dawn who was the singer for the Little Death. They had that project, but through that introduction and that audition, Moby was like, "Hey, I'm writing a bunch of material for this album, and I'm having singers, maybe co-write if they're interested in sing." So we co-wrote a bunch of tunes. The only one that really saw the album was The Low Hum, which was on Destroyed. And then there was one song which he had written called Breakdown, which was in the reissue with extra stuff. And that song was also recorded by, I didn't write it. He had written it, but I just sang it for the English version. But there was a French artist who had recorded it in French as well. So there was that.
That's rad.
I mean, it was cool. That was the probably biggest electronic project I had done up to that point.
But Moby's huge. It
is huge. And we didn't do a song that was like in any way conventional. So it was destined to be an album track. You know, it was a song without a chorus, basically.
Okay.
But it was a really cool experience because he was going for this vibe with Destroyed that he kind of talked about a little bit. But I guess I had written the lyrics to The Low Hum right as I was moving into a new apartment. And the way the music kind of inspired me to write about that space. And we just talked about being alone in a quiet place. And that was what the experience I wrote about that I had right before I moved into this apartment, which was in Murray Hill and was like 2 blocks from Bellevue Hospital. So I was sitting on a 3rd floor walk up with nothing but a strand of Christmas lights across a big window. And all you could hear you could hear a little bit of the neighbors through the wall, and you could hear that industrial hum when you're near a hospital.
Sure.
And it was night. And so there was this twinkly light, and I'm sitting on the floor, and I was imagining what it would look like to have snow fall and watch it through this big window. And it was something that I was looking forward to because I moved in the fall. And I just wrote these kind of associations with that space, and it became that song. And he was really psyched about it because he's like, "Oh my God, you got the total vibe,"
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't say it that crazy. That's like my energy. That's in movies. But he was really excited about like the fact that I tapped into this, and we hadn't talked about it much, but somehow it was exactly what he wanted to kind of bring across in this album and the photo book that went along with it. So,
Wow.
Happy accident, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's rad. And then I did read too that you got a chance to play with the Blue Man Group. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing, the Blue Man Group thing. A large portion of that New York Blue Man people that I worked with, the musicians who were kind of like writing stuff for the show, and a couple of the original three guys I met from my Burning Man crew. They were like the New York portion of the Burning Man crew that we would go out and do these big camps with. And I was part of the San Francisco crew that was part of this funk band on a flatbed truck. So,
wait, sorry, I have a quick question about that. Because I know Burning Man.
When did you go? That's.
I've never been. I just know about it. I lived in the Bay Area for about 5 years.
What years?
2009 to 2014.
Okay. I was long gone by then. I was there from 97 to 2001.
Okay.
So I went to 2 Burning Mans when it was really still a bunch of dirt ravers. You know, like there was a central camp, and then you'd like walk for an hour and find this like rubber duck in the middle of the playa that was just spinning like crazy house music from like, 11 p.m. until 5 a.m.
Right.
So there was that portion. And then I met the funk mobile people in San Francisco. And then I started going out with them where this was a reaction to everything out there was techno. And this guy, Alex Castle, who's a good friend of mine, was like sick to death with just the techno stuff. So he's like, we're going to form a funk band and put it on a flatbed truck and just play Sex Machine for 10 hours. So that was the idea behind the Funk Mobile.
Okay.
And it's funny because as soon as you put a funk band on a flatbed truck and just drive around, even if you're just playing Sex Machine, let alone like Funkadelic, The Meters, Stevie Wonder, once you start doing that, you kind of become this weird Pied Piper out in the desert.
Sure.
You have like crazy hippies and, dirt ravers and, crazy, psychedelic travelers and people who are like science nerds, and they just kind of follow you around and they're dancing and it's a really good vibe. And,
but is there a New York, there's not a New York Burning Man, right?
But there were people from New York
that
who were coming, and a lot of them worked at Blue Man Group.
Got
so we had
That's where I was confused.
Group of musicians.
I was I think that's in California.
This collective of all these musicians that became part of the Funk Mobile. And so whenever I moved to New York, they knew I was a singer, and they knew me from that. So I got called in to do different stuff. I auditioned as an understudy for Tracy Bonham for the tour. I did some vocal work for a couple of productions that Blue Man Group was working on. One involved puppets. I did lips for the tour when there were like projections that had lips singing along at different points. One of them were my lips and teeth. So when they came out to do the shows at the Hollywood Bowl, they had this element, this character thing they'd written into the show called the Zuzu Singers, which was like a barbershop quartet. And they're like, we're coming to LA. We know Zuzik is out there. She's got to be a Zuzu singer. So I became one of the 4 that were the barbershop quartet who were in a closet that would pop out and be like, zoo, 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 zoo. And they'd be singing along with the Blue Men. It was a crazy show. But it was really lovely because there was this core group of my old friends that I'd known for over 10 years that were part of this show that I didn't get to see often. And then I was part of this like little group that was they were like a little gnat. They'd show up and be part of the show, then they'd disappear, and then they'd show up again. And the best part was the grand finale, because the show sold out for 2 nights. So I was singing with this group in front of 14,000 people, which is the biggest thing I'd ever been part of. And there were fireworks and the Zuzus. The end of the show, they had like The End from Abbey Road. And I'm a huge Beatles fan.
Oh, same here.
I was part of, there were probably 100 people on stage. There was this Brazilian drumming group that they had met when Blue Man Group went down to Brazil. There was the Blue Man Group rock band. There were the Zuzu singers. There was a didgeridoo player. And I have I recorded the backstage feed because it was total union shop. You could not record it technically, but I wanted it for keepsakes. So there was someone who wasn't in that finale who just, shot it with her phone. And I have it somewhere on my computer, but it's so fun. It's like, you're singing, and in the end, so like they hit the big drum, and then there's the break, and then where the piano comes in. The Zuzu singers sang, and in the end, along with some other people, the love, and it was like harmonies everywhere. And we're
Okay.
right up front, and you're looking up at 14,000 people. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional just talking about it.
Sure.
But it was just this beautiful moment. I was like, I knew I was present for it. And I had this moment like, I have to take this in because I don't know if I'll ever do this again. And, you know, and then like the fireworks go off and there's like standing ovation. And it was just so emotional being part of this collective musical moment. It was really special.
That is so cool. I mean,
yeah.
I can't imagine looking in the Hollywood Bowl of all places. I mean,
I know.
iconic
It
venue.
was it was really a big deal.
Wow.
I had that experience one other time, but it wasn't nearly at that scale. It was at the end of the run we did with Ari and Benji. We had Michael Brunick jump on as well, and we played this really beautiful church that had been converted into a musical performance space. And I was playing this song that we all sang on called Step Back, and there were like, I don't know, like 50 to 70 people in this church, and it was really pristine acoustic sound. And I knew it was the last time that all of us would sing together. And I had that same moment where it was the first time I'd ever been able to like, I began crying on stage while I was singing, and I didn't warble because usually when I get emotional, I get flustered and I can't really sing through it. But I remember going, this is the last time, and I was overcome with the emotion. And I made it through and sang it as I would sing it. And it was just a really present, beautiful moment there, too.
That's amazing.
So I've had that twice that I can remember.
Yeah.
Maybe if I think about it more, there were a couple other times. But those were two really seminal musical, spiritual moments for me.
Sure. And you're doing all this all while releasing records also?
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you're releasing records on your own, it's kind of on your time. So there's less like big pressure on you. But yeah, I was doing that. And then when the other thing about the Blue Man Group thing was I had a 1-year-old.
Oh,
so
wow.
I was like also trying to balance like, okay, my husband's working. He was still in, I think, TV at the time. So he was keeping crazy edit hours. And we had like a part-time babysitter nanny, and I was like, okay, I've got rehearsals from here to here. Do we have coverage with, you know, the baby? And then it was a lot. It was a lot of stuff. And thankfully, like after that show closed, my family went up to Arrowhead for like 2 or 3 days to just like be among the trees.
Decompress, kind of.
Yeah, because that's really intense stuff between the rehearsals and the like getting ready for it and making sure you're on and having all those parts moving and then having that huge adrenaline rush for the 2 shows. It was intense.
Yeah.
And then, you know, since then I've done stuff in LA too, not at that scale, but like weird stuff happened. Like one of my co-writers, Art Hayes, and I ended up doing the music for an NBC theme song.
Really?
And so
what
it
show?
It was a 1-season show called Love Bites.
Okay.
Which was sort of based on like different ensembles that had like different storylines were going at the same time, and sometimes they would overlap and sometimes they wouldn't. But it was a cover of a Pretender song, and
cool.
I sang that. So that was like a weird blip. You know, that's the thing about when you're in the music industry for a long time. Most of the time, your experience is not like this.
Sure.
Sometimes it's like this, and then you're like, okay, I'm getting the hell out. But most of the times it's this, you know, like, oh, here's a peek. Like I'm playing at the Apple Store for this record that's coming out, and I'm doing a track with Moby, and like, this is going to be it. And
right.
It never usually works out that way. It's like, oh, this is it and then you're down here again, and then you're like, oh my God, Blue Man Group at the Hollywood Bowl, and then you're down here again, and then you're like, I'm making this record with Tim Lefebvre again, and it's going to be awesome. And then like everybody goes their own ways because they've got touring schedules, and it didn't, you know, and you just keep going. And that's the thing. And the longer you're doing that, the more the pool of people, you know, gets smaller. I mean, granted, there's a whole new batch of people who are jumping in,
right,
who are like people resurrecting legacy careers that kind of come back into it. But you're like, hey, how's it going? We've been doing this for 15 years.
Sure, yeah.
And the truth is, now I'm sort of part of this community out here that's like the roots Americana scene here. And a lot of these people have known one another for like 20 plus years. And they've been in LA for 20 plus years doing it. And I'm a relative newbie in this circle. But, I've dialed in with some really talented folks who I've been working with on a number of projects. Namely, the first name that comes to mind is Ted Russell Camp, my producer, who just put out a record called Down in the Den, which is amazing. But he's like Shooter Jennings, bass player for a long time. And because Shooter's kind of gone down a production route, he's been involved with the Duff McKagan record. He played on the Tanya Tucker record. He did some work on the new Marilyn Manson record that Shooter produced. So Ted's done all this work, and Ted's worked with a number of musicians producing their albums. He produced Torch and Trouble. Ta-da!
Awesome.
And a number of the acts he's produced, he's had me come in as a vocalist on. So it's the spider web.
Sure.
The connections you make over time. And there have been people who I worked with, a long time ago who've come back. The Blue Man Group was an example of that, where I did a bunch of stuff in New York with them, and then they were out in LA and they called me. I'm trying to think of somebody who recently, okay. So Brad Bird and I, who went to college together but didn't know one another then, he was doing music the whole time, and I wasn't. I was sort of like in and out of different stuff, and but we reconnected at Americana Fest last year when I was singing on Ted's show. That also Brad was on that gig as well, but Brad was playing with Rob Calder on bass, and Rob and I did the UK tour together, the one with Ari and Benji. So I reconnected with Rob, and I reconnected with Brad. Brad and I have since done some shows together, and I sang like some tracks that I don't know, like background stuff. I don't know if they used it or not. But then also I reconnected with Rob in this radio thing that Nick Harcourt spearheaded out here for 88.5 called Together Tunes, which was like musicians getting together and writing songs during quarantine. And
cool.
I got connected with Rob to this guy, Todd Carter in New York, who has a band called The Looking. And Todd and I kind of wrote this tune, and then Rob came back in and wrote the bass line and some other stuff, and the three of us ended up submitting it. I found out about the contest, and I ended up submitting it, and it ended up getting played on air.
Wow.
And then as it turns out, Brad Bird was doing stuff with some other people, and he had a tune that got on air. But I mean, it's like that. You reconnect with people, and you make new stuff. And hopefully it's with people who've been doing it for a long time. So you all have different people to bring to the table contact-wise to then send it out to. And that's really exciting. That's the journey right there. You want to talk about the journey? That's
that's the journey. And you have a new record out, or it's coming out?
It's in pre-sales now. It's called Torch and Trouble. It comes out on August 28th.
Awesome.
And I'm hoping to get you guys, well, not you guys, but American Songwriter, who you work with on this podcast, a video and a song to have sort of to put out. And I'm working with other things, other publications to do other videos. I mean, this video thing is coming very handy because now that I'm doing it, I'm like, okay, let me put together like 2 or 3 different videos, and I'll bring them to different people. So everybody will get a different exclusive. And then everybody's spider webs, like come together. A lot of them already like know one another and like are all doing things. But that as an independent artist, and this is technically, I guess it's still an indie label, but I'm co-releasing it with yet another spiderweb instance. My old drummer, Ryan Vaughn, he and his now wife, Jessica Vaughn, who was at the time Jessie Polland, who was in Charlotte sometimes, and so had her own artist career, and now does work in a number of projects on her own and does work for commercial music like I have done in different directions. They have a label called Head Bitch Music, and they're co-releasing the album with me in
That's
my
awesome.
indie label. So it's interesting how you live your life,
Right.
both in your musical life, your personal life, your, if you have side hustles, that world, and if they overlap. It's just fun. It's fun to see it with perspective now. And that's another thing quarantine does. You've got a lot of time to think about these things.
Sure.
So you can see the connections. And
I was gonna say, do you feel, is it cool? Are you cool with releasing the record during quarantine?
I pushed it back once. It was supposed to
Okay.
come out in May. And then I was like, you know what? We'll probably be out of this by June, July.
Yeah.
And I was looking for, a lot of us were thinking that, like everything would just get pushed back half a year. And I was like, I can live with that. Let's just pull an arbitrary date in late August and put it out then. And then when things got cuckoo, because people can't live with quarantine, I guess, and the spreads got crazy.
Right. It's back now.
I was like, I'm not pushing it back anymore. I need to get it out. I have time. And that was the other thing. I'm terrible with planning. I just want to I want to do the instant karma method, like write it, record it, put it out,
Right.
That's not a very effective way to draw attention to things because people don't want to write about something after the fact. So it forced me. I bought a big old calendar and I wrote all these dates down. And I did some planning, and in the process of pushing it back, was able to see some other people in the Roots community put out records and see who's interested in what they're doing. And then I've used my PR publicity background and be like, okay, hey, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm releasing a record. It's produced by Ted Russell Camp. I saw that you really liked my friend blah, blah, blah's record. I think you might be into it. Can I send you one? Yeah. So it forces you out of your shyness world. I mean, I've worked with publicists in the past, and they've helped me. And the other thing is, I haven't worked much besides royalty work since February. So I don't have discretionary income to bring other people in. So I've been getting resourceful with getting out of my shell and reaching out to people and talking to my producer and going who do you recommend you've had success with blah and blah. Do you think they dig the record? Who should we target? How do you think we should do it? And having those kinds of conversations. And, this was one of those things. I saw through that you guys did something with Hannah Fairlight. And Hannah I met through my friends. She's back. Anana Kay. Okay, you can't keep doing this, but what do you need? Okay, you want to hug me. Thank you for the hug. I love you. All right, so she's going to milk it.
That's all good.
Go. So I met Hannah when she was dropping off some homemade hummus to my friends Anana Kay. She's part of an East Nashville cooking collective. They all exchange food that they make.
Oh, cool.
And I met her there. She also performs at the Bowery Vault, which is run by an old friend of mine who used to tour under the name Mahogany from New York and from Rockwood. And so that's another connection again. I played at the Bowery Vault when I was at Americana Fest last year. And that's when I met Hannah. And I've been following her release too. And I saw you guys interviewed her.
Yeah, she's
great. And I'm learning more about her and her backstory as well through the movie that she had done and her husband's career playing with Kiss and other members. With Kiss,
yeah, I know.
Which is rad because I'm always wearing my Kiss shirt and people are always like, did you go to that tour? I was like, no, but I love Kiss. And I bought this at a sample sale and I love it.
My mask is Kiss. Everyone has a mask now.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. So which one are you?
It's all of them all together. And it says Kiss. Okay. Yeah, it would be cool if it was the Gene Simmons.
Just the tongue. If they build an extra thing.
But it just has the heads all over it and Kiss. But yeah, I love Kiss. So
that's cool because I did Kiss too. Yeah. And but it was through Hannah that I found out about this, and I reached out to my contact at American Songwriter and said, hey, do you guys do this? Is there someone I should reach out to and talk to? And they're like, I think it's outsourced, but talk to this guy. And then Tara got back in touch with me. Yeah. And so here you go. Another example of the people you meet leading to new people.
Sure.
And my
That's so
husband
cool.
used to have this funny thing. He's like, these are the questions. I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, okay, so it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. I'm forgetting how he said them. One of them was like, never be afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And then always say yes to opportunities.
Sure.
So there's these like little things that they were things he said to me. And so I've been trying to work on those as well, because I have a tendency to be like, nah, it's never gonna work out.
Right.
I'm the malcontent. I'm Slavic. I'm Eastern European. We're negative people by.
Are you Slavic, really?
Zuzik? I mean, come on. It's Czechoslovakian to the core.
I'm Czechoslovakian too. My last name is, how funny.
What's your last name? Oh, it's Lefebvre. Okay.
Yeah.
I would have guessed somewhere in the Eastern Bloc. Not necessarily Slavic, but like maybe you're Bosnian.
No,
maybe
Slovak.
Yeah. So,
Slovakia.
That's right. And Slovakia is very different than Czech, Republic.
Yeah.
The Czech were the urbane, poets and writers, and the Slovakians were like the
poor
farmers, poor farmers on the other side of the country,
right.
Who all lived within like, a town over from like every other member of like the community.
Sure. I wonder if our relatives,
where are they from?
Hundreds, like, I would have to ask.
Yeah, I know that my family was like 50 miles from the Ukraine, which at the time was Russia. So they would be like, we live 50 miles from the Russian border. And we're from Mihalovich and, these little towns. And
I have no clue. I remember asking my grandfather about it, and he was kind of like, I don't know. He wasn't very, I don't really remember like where exactly they're from. But
I've met some cousins. I had one of my dad's uncles, my great uncle went over to Slovakia, and he met some relatives over there. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was already like making 4-track records, and they came to visit my family, and it was like a doctor and his parents. So his parents, I think the doctor was like between my age and my parents' age, and his parents were between my great uncle's age and my parents' age. So it was one of those like staggered age things, but the parents didn't speak any English.
Sure.
So my Uncle Joe was speaking Slavic between my parents and the parents. And the doctor, had a little bit of English, so we cobbled together a conversation, but he was very interested in the fact that his younger cousin was a musician.
Sure.
And I remember, I think I gave him like a cassette tape of like my 4-track record at the time, I might have even been in college. I can't remember if it was high school or college when they visited. And I'm in touch with my cousin who's the doctor on Facebook. So he occasionally dials in and like, this is my rock star cousin, in the United States. And but it's funny,
that's really cool.
Stories in the journey.
Yeah. Well, Emily, thank you so much for talking with me today. You have a great story. I really appreciate
Adam.
your time.
It's fun to talk about it, and thank you for having me.
Of course.
I hope we talked enough about, music. I know you're supposed to like, plug your new release, but there's been so many other stories along the way. This release wouldn't have happened.
Tell me real quick about the new record, and then I have one more question for you.
Sure. So Torch and Trouble is my most disciplined effort to make a country/Americana album.
Okay.
I tried to pick songs from my catalog that fit that, and tried to write newer songs over the last 5 years that would fall into that vein. And then I chose to work with Ted, who's like Mr. Americana out here, to help me put that together. That's what I'll say about that record. There's some really old songs on it, songs that are over 10 years old, and there are some newer songs in the last 3 to 5 years. One of which is a duet I wrote with Ted called Embers that we both sing on. And I think that we did a pretty good job. It's still a little eclectic, but it's very much eclectic in that genre.
Very cool.
Instead of like, here's the jazz song, here's the Brazilian bossa nova song, And,
that's cool. Well,
what's your last question?
My last question is, do you have any advice for aspiring artists?
Well, it's not always easy, and most times it isn't, but it can be really fun, and it can test you. You learn a lot about yourself in how you handle these ups and downs and writing experiences, whether you do it alone or you co-write with people, and each of those things leads to new things, as we've talked about. I try to always dial in with younger musicians, particularly younger women, because you know, the journey's a little different on this side of the gender divide, and God only knows with, you know, every other fluidity in the middle, because, you know, it's a lot of this is putting yourself up for display, and I want to be loved. And a lot of times people are like, whatever, I'm doing it, you know, and it falls in all shades of gray in the spectrum as where you are in that level of needing love and validation for what we're doing here. Keep doing it. Whether you become the next big star or not really isn't the thing. I mean, it is for some people more than others. I've learned about myself that it isn't the end goal for me. I would like to have the respect of my peers, and I would like to know, to have it mirrored back to me that this journey is all, you know, was not all for naught, you know. I think I've learned a lot. I think I've grown as a writer and as a performer, and I think I have something to offer, both as an artist, but also in a mentoring capacity. So I've enjoyed being part of collectives along the way, which have, you know, women who've done it for a long, long time and women who are just getting into it and are much younger. I think you can learn from everybody. So listen and, you know, take what you like and leave the rest. And other than that, you have to know what works for you, and how are you going to do it is not going to be a one-size-fits-all experience. So I don't know, that's, I guess, my advice. And, you know, sometimes I put myself out there. I've talked on panels and stuff too, where like, well, if you have a question, send me an email, and I don't want to open the floodgates, but, you know, if I can be of help, or if I can shed some light on things that might be helpful to someone, I try to do that.